Hi everyone, this is going to be a super cozy, I hope it's super cozy, reading vlog. Last week, Mr. M and I went to the New Forest, which was really lovely. We were able to do that last autumn as well. It's a cottage in the middle of nowhere. The New Forest is about a 2-hour drive from London, and we were able to borrow his mum's car and drive there and just be alone in the middle of the woods, except not entirely alone because it is pannage at the moment. So I don't think I explained this in the vlog clips coming. So briefly, the New Forest is a very magical place, really. There are ponies and cows that roam freely, wild, across the New Forest all year round. But in the autumn, farmers let out their pigs on pannage. And the reason for that is that pigs really love acorns, but acorns are poisonous to the New Forest ponies. So they let the pigs out, the pigs eat the acorns, and the ponies are all fine. So if you go down at this time of year, end of September, beginning of October, you may spy some pigs just wandering around. So it's a lovely time of year to go. And I'm still shielding at the moment, which is not something I really talk about anymore because I'm I'm tired, guys. I'm so tired. So it was a really cherished week away. Yeah, it's been a long 18 months. So I decided when I went down to the New Forest that I would take some books with me and I would do a reading vlog. I forgot to film an intro, which is why I'm filming this today, which is the day it's being uploaded. Let's pretend it's a week ago. So 2 weeks ago, I uploaded a video talking about all Nikki French books, all of their crime thriller books, because I finished reading them all. So I thought what I would do is I would take 10 crime thrillers with me, all by different authors, and try and read as many as I can and talk to you about them. So that is what I did. Let me quickly show you the 10 books that I took with me. I'm not going to talk about the blurbs or anything because I'll talk about them as this vlog progresses, but these were the 10 books that I pulled off my shelves and packed, it wasn't a suitcase, put in a tote bag, a huge tote bag, and shoved in the back of the car. So I took Mrs. March by Virginia Feito, To Dare by Jemma Wayne, The Aosawa Murders by Riku Onda, The Darkest Day by Hasan, Blind Goddess by Anne Holt, Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt, The Second Woman by Louise May, Girl 11, excuse me, by Amy Suiter Clarke, Cat Step by Alison Irvine, and The Talented Mr. Ripley. I just dropped some books on the floor. They're fine. And The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. So those were the 10 books that I took with me to the middle of the forest. And before I crack on with the vlog footage, quickly, my new book is coming out next week. It's called The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers. It looks like this. It is 14 gruesome tales from around the world, retold by me, illustrated by Adam D'Souza, queer rep, disability rep, perfect for ages 8 to 12, but for adults too. If you missed my announcement video, I'll link that in the description box down below. Pre-orders are so important, and if this book sounds like it's up your street, it would mean so much if you could pre-order. As I said, I'm still shielding, so I'm not doing book tour this time, but I do plan on doing online events, and I will tell you about those later. All right, on with the vlog footage. Let's go to the middle of a forest and talk about some crime thrillers and see if we can spy any pigs. Spoiler, we see some pigs. Hello, it's been a couple of days. I haven't filmed yet because I've just been settling into holiday, but I want to vlog the rest of the trip. So after this segment, there will be some outdoor footage, and then I'll come back inside and talk to you about books at various different points. So we've been here a couple of days and I've had a good time and a not so good time with 2 books so far. So the first book that I picked up ended up being a DNF, which is not what you want really at any point, but especially on holiday when you've picked books that you hope you're going to love. So the first one was this, which is To Dare by Jemma Wayne, and this is about two women who have moved in next door to each other. This is about a woman called Veronica who moves into a beautifully redecorated Victorian terrace London house with her husband George, and next door in a council flat we have Simone, who's living there with her partner Terry. Terry is a very abusive person, and Veronica can hear them fighting, or rather Terry fighting with Simone, through the walls. Veronica is really jealous of Simone in some respects because they have a child together, and Simone is very jealous of Veronica because she has money. This book is really intense. There's a lot of assault, sexual assault, child abuse, child neglect, and I don't like reading about subjects like that that are sensationalized, and it's really hard to know where that kind of barrier is in crime and thrillers, because obviously you are sensationalizing horrible things to further the plot of a book. That's exactly what crime and thrillers are. Not very nice things are going to happen. That's the whole point. I think it's more to do with a gut feeling, and I think everyone's feeling on this is different, which is why we all enjoy different kinds of books. If I'm reading about something to do with neglect, like child neglect and abuse and sexual assault, I want to feel like I'm in really safe hands when it comes to the writing and the writing style. I want to feel as though this is being handled in a specific kind of way. So for instance, when I read The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld, which is about male violence against women, it is an exquisitely written book, and I believed in all of the characters that I was reading about, and I deeply cared about them, and it took the narrative and the pain to a separate place, instead of the whole impact being the shock of not nice things happening. So for that reason, To Dare didn't really work for me, because I felt that it relied on that too much. And that's not something that I particularly enjoy reading, but I think that is just a personal taste thing, and there are lots of people who would definitely enjoy this book. So if you feel like you can handle really intense subjects like that in very plot driven, shock value kind of ways, then maybe look into picking up this book. But it wasn't for me, so I put that one down, and instead I decided to pick up this, which is Mrs. March by Virginia Feito. Now this has had quite a lot of hype surrounding it. I think it's already been optioned for a film, starring Elizabeth Moss, who actually has a quote on it somewhere. Yeah, she said, "I read Mrs. March in one sitting and was so captured by it. Mrs. March is fascinating, complex and deeply human." And because I knew that it had been optioned for film with Elizabeth Moss playing Mrs. March, that is who I pictured when I read this book, and I can definitely see her playing that role, having seen her in The Handmaid's Tale and an Australian crime show that I've forgotten the name of. Top of the Lake? Is it Top of the Lake? Something like that. Anyway, I can definitely see her playing this character. So this is about a character called Mrs. March, who goes to a bakery one day, and when she's there, the person behind the till, who she normally really loves talking to, says to her, "How do you feel about your husband basing the main character in his new book on you?" And Mrs. March is really shocked because she hasn't read the book, but she knows that the main character is supposed to be ugly, not very well dressed, wearing messy makeup, and who sleeps with a lot of men. And she is appalled that this person behind the counter thinks that her husband has based his character on her. But as soon as she says that, she can't get it out of her head, and she is determined, absolutely determined, to trip her husband up into confessing that that's exactly what he did. Mrs. March is an extremely unreliable narrator because she is so paranoid, but a lot of that is maybe from gaslighting. So it's really quite hard to work out what suspicions of hers are accurate and which are not. And if I had to draw comparison with another book, I would link it with Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh, which is about a woman who discovers a note in a forest saying, this is Magda, I did not kill her, here is her body. And she goes off to try and solve the mystery of this supposedly dead girl, but there was no body. And she's wondering if people that she knew murdered Magda, or maybe she did and she's forgotten. Mrs. March is very like that. And what's really wonderful about this book is that her mask of Mrs. March never slips at all. So we find out about her childhood, but whenever she's talked about, even as a baby, she's called Mrs. March. So Mrs. March, the toddler. It's very Stepford Wives. There is a lot of mirroring going on. There are lots of references to Jane Eyre, which if you've been here a while, you know that I love books that really play with that duality of Jane Eyre, the duality of Jane and Bertha, and how they represent two halves of the same person, or two ways of looking at feminism or femininity, and how society wants you to quash one side of you, the sexual side of you, and present yourself to the world in a very plain, ordinary way. It's really scary in places because she's imagining all of these terrible things, and it's so tense. I read it in 2 sittings, and I would have read it in 1 if I hadn't had to go to bed. I loved it, and I think it's going to be one of my favourite books of the year because it's all about the performative nature of self, and Mrs. March's husband is a novelist. It is as though she is a fictional character who she has brought to life herself, and her husband has honed through his gaslighting. She has no sense of who she is anymore, and she has to constantly examine herself as if she was a piece of text to kind of nudge herself back in line, and it's hard to work out what of that is due to who she is as a person and her own mental health, and what has been knocked into strange shapes because of the toxic nature of the people around her. So this is something that made me laugh. This is a couple of paragraphs where she's talking about her son Jonathan and also her stepdaughter Paula, so her husband's daughter from another marriage. Jonathan was a messy and occasionally pouty child, but he was quiet and thoughtful and smelled modestly of fresh laundry and soccer field grass. He was currently away on a school trip to the Fitzwilliam Chess and Fencing Retreat in upstate New York and would be returning in a couple of days. Mrs. March was proud of herself for occasionally wondering what he was doing, which she had decided was a symptom of missing him. Paula, now 23, enjoyed a fabulous lifestyle, as she probably assumed was her birthright, and lived in London, no less, where Mrs. March herself had long fantasised about living. A steak at the Wolseley and drinks at the Savoy, a play in the West End on Saturdays. Paula often called to catch up with George, her husband. She never failed to ask after Mrs. March, which Mrs. March regarded as prying. It really is funny in places as well as being disturbing and tense and scary in others, and I, as I said, loved it and would very much recommend. Good morning. I come to you from the very floral spare room that feels like Little Women meets Cath Kidston. I've picked up my third book, and this is The Darkest Day by Håkan Nesser, and this is translated from the Swedish by Sarah Death. I'd forgotten that. Such a brilliant name, Sarah Death. Okay, so this is a huge book. It is, I'm always nervous checking the exact page numbers of crime because I don't want to accidentally see spoilers at the end, more so than any other genre of book. It's over 530 pages, so this is a very large book, and it is slow paced so far, family saga. It is about a family. I haven't read the blurb again since buying it because I don't want to spoil it, but if I remember correctly, and from the bits that I've read so far, it's about a family that gather together for a birthday celebration on a Swedish island. The father and one of the daughters share a birthday. I actually share a birthday with my dad too, and they're meeting there for their birthday celebrations, but no one really wants to do it, and all the children are grown up. They have children of their own now, and every single family so far, because the chapter moves between each section of the family, seems to be pretty miserable or has something quite hectic going on. And it's definitely a change in pace from a lot of thrillers that I've read recently, as you know, because I would have said at the beginning of this video that I've been reading a lot of Nikki French recently, which are character-driven books, but they definitely move quite swiftly, whereas this is moving very slowly. And when I first started reading it, I was thinking, this is really interesting because I do want to get to know these characters and, you know, really spend a lot of time building up a family history, but at the same time, please get on with it. Like, it took a bit of an adjustment, but I'm really invested right now. I am 60 pages in, and there is so much scandal going on, so many family secrets, not even necessarily huge ones, but a lot of, you know, pasting smiles on your faces and lying on the phone to your parents and pretending that you're fine. One of the sons got divorced. He was a writer and it wasn't working out very well, so he decided he'd be a sportsman, and that didn't go very well either. So in a huge pit of despair, he decided to sign up to what is essentially a very extreme version of Love Island that they were filming on a Swedish island, where the aim wasn't to pair up by the end, but whichever woman got pregnant first won loads of money, and it was this huge controversy, and he's basically brought shame on the family. So he's the one that the rest of the family are least looking forward to seeing, but I imagine that his scandal is actually probably quite minor compared to a lot of things that other family members are covering up. So really enjoying this one so far.
Prue and Paul will now rank the malt loaves from the worst to the best.
In 12th spot, we have...
I'm halfway through the book. I like it, but there's incest. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'll come back to you. If you thought the deer had gone home, you would be wrong. Just chilling. Hey dude. Did you hear that owl? It's living its best life. I finished this book. I think I said when I started reading this book that it's set on an island. It's not. And I think I'm mixing up 2 books in this series because I was sent a review copy of the 3rd book in this series, which I think is set on an island. And I decided I would buy the 1st book and then if I liked it, continue and then eventually get to the 3rd book. But yeah, I'm not sure. So this is about a family reunion and I really liked all the bits that were about the family. And I would say nearly the first half is about the family and what they think about each other and their interactions and the incest, which I'll just keep mentioning because I'm just not over it yet. And there's some weird stuff to do with sexuality. It feels like it's written in the 90s by a straight person who doesn't really know that many gay people as opposed to in 2017, you know, which is just a bit of a weird thing to read now. Also, just bisexuality apparently just doesn't really exist, which as a bisexual person I take offence to. I didn't love our main detective guy who we then switched to halfway through. And the crime is revealed in a really strange way because you find out who has committed the crimes quite matter-of-factly, and then you know a lot more than the other characters do. And I didn't enjoy that because I felt it wasn't very tense and it meant that I was really wanting it to speed up so that all the other characters could get up to speed with where we were. So before we were just, yes, Al, before we were just told who had committed these crimes, I was into it. But then when I found out, I was just a bit deflated and not that bothered anymore. I mean, I like the character development in it, but yes, Al, I just wasn't sure about the rest of it really. And there are some weird similes in here, like Carl Eric just stood there in the middle of the room looking like a male boxer dog that had trapped his paw in a lift door. I thought that was kind of strange simile. There are lots of similes like that. I think if you like Kate Atkinson's Jackson Brodie series, then you'll like this. And I didn't enjoy that series for similar reasons, actually. I enjoyed the character development, but I didn't like the reveals as much. And also with that one and with this book, I find myself having less and less time or patience with books that not only are not diverse, but when they're trying to be diverse, they're just clumsy and awkward, like when we're discussing sexuality in this book. You know, I just feel like I've read too many books like that and I would rather spend my time with the Attica Lockes and Kirsten Lepionkas of this world. So not a favourite. Not a favourite, a shame, because, you know, love books set in very cold climates, but I really was wishing the pages away towards the end, which is not how you want to feel in a crime book, is it? No, not really. Okay, on to the next book. Good morning. There are so many ponies in our drive right now. Should we go say hi from a distance? Give them a wave. Morning. Oh hey, it is the evening and spoiler, I am here to talk to you about books. Bet you didn't see that coming. The fourth book that I decided to pick up is this one here called Cat Step by Alison Irvine. And I was super excited about this one. I'd mentioned it in a couple of videos because the blurb really excited me. It's about a woman who moves to a small town with her daughter and she doesn't want anyone to pay attention to her, so she's keeping a really low profile. So we're supposed to think she's fleeing something. It's very intriguing, but then one day she goes to the supermarket and she leaves her 4-year-old daughter Emily in the car when she goes in, and people see that and they call the police, and then she's interrogated and people are really paying attention to her. And I really love that twitching curtain, small town gossip, building a narrative about all of that. That sounded really wonderful, but unfortunately that's not what this book really seems to be. It's very insular and it's not looking at, you know, the town and what people are saying, and the writing style just is not something that I am gelling with. It's one of those books which I know we all get sometimes when we're reading it and just thinking, I could read this and I could finish it, but no matter what the plot does, I don't think I'm going to love this book because I'm not invested in the writing style or the characters or the plot as it currently is. It's not that it's a bad book at all, but it's just not for me, and that's absolutely fine. So I'm gonna pass this on to somebody else, and I'm sad about it because I was really excited to read this one. But maybe the author's next book, but this one I don't feel was quite there for me. So I decided to pick up this one as my next book, which is The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. And I have had this on my shelf only since last year, but I've been meaning to read more Patricia Highsmith for ages, and I feel like she is a safe bet. I really hope so. I really hope so, because I have loved other books by her. So I've just started reading this one, and if you, like me, are one of the few people who have not read The Talented Mr. Ripley and have also not seen an adaptation of it, I don't know how many of us that is, I'm not sure, but I have managed to not read or see a version of this title. Let me briefly tell you what it is about. It's a book about a man called Mr. Ripley, Tom, and we open with him walking through the streets of New York in 1950 something, and he thinks that a man is following him, and he's really nervous about that at first, in a criminal kind of way, because he's in a bit of trouble for doing some forgery. But then he changes his mind and he thinks, it's not someone who's following me because I've done something wrong, it's a man who's following me because he wants to sleep with me. And then he's trying to think of ways he will deflect that because he's not really in the mood for that today. But then he goes into a bar to try and get rid of this man, and it turns out that he was wrong on both counts. And the man who is following him is a man called Mr. Greenleaf, and he wanted to speak to Tom because his son, Richard, is in Italy and won't come home. It's so of the time. This rich boy Richard has gone to Italy and is frittering away his money, and his father wants him to come home and grow up and be part of his business. And would Tom be ever so kind as to go to Europe and try and persuade him to come home? You know, everyday stuff. Haven't we all had requests like that? So Tom pretends he doesn't really want to do it just because he wants Mr. Greenleaf to like him and trust him and not think that he's trying to exploit him, whilst at the same time he's thinking about all the ways that he could potentially exploit him, because he doesn't even know if he wants to go and convince Richard to come home. He thinks, maybe I'll just go over there and have a damn good time with Richard and it'll be great. I really love the queer undertones or overtones with Patricia Highsmith's books, and I just love the way that they are written, and they're really, I was going to say they're really fast-paced. I don't remember Carol being fast-paced, but this is super fast-paced. So you are absolutely dragged into the story really quickly. And I like how she's not afraid to just skip over details and times that she just thinks is not very important. I think it's quite reflective of the way that Tom is seeing the world, because he sees the world differently. He's a bit of a sociopath, I think. And he just wants to pay attention to the things that are important to him, and he doesn't care about anything else, and the book kind of reflects that. So days will slip by while she'll just give you a cursory sentence or two, and then you'll really pay attention to the things that Tom would like you to pay attention to. I love the tone of it. I think it's very endearing, which is a strange thing to say about someone who is a sociopath, but I really like it, and I'm hoping that I'm gonna enjoy all of it right up until the end. And I don't think I'll talk about the plot anymore because of, you know, spoilers and all that. But it is, you know, a thriller, so stuff is presumably gonna happen. So I'm very excited about that. I'm gonna continue reading this. Tomorrow I think we are gonna go for a walk by the sea. There is a coastal walk which is always completely empty, so we're gonna go do that, and I'm gonna go to bed because I am super tired. So I will see you tomorrow. to you from the Little Women Cath Kidston spare room again. I finished reading The Talented Mr. Ripley this morning, and what an absolute delight this book is. I just want to hug it, keep it close to me. I always find it strange referring to crime as cosy, though I know that we do that, and when we think about cosy crime, I think about the British Library crime classic series that is set like in the 1930s or something. So I think that this feels cosy because it's set in the 1950s, so there's a bit of a distance to it, and it is told in quite a detached way, and there is such a theatrical nature to it, and you're told everything so matter-of-factly because it's really from Tom's perspective, and he does look at things in a very matter-of-fact kind of way. So again, that creates some kind of distance, but at the same time you're in Rome and Naples and Venice, and it's all just delightful apart from the murder. But you know, the murder causes intrigue and it's just great. I loved it, and I'm kind of mad at myself for not reading more Patricia Highsmith, because I read Carol the year the film came out, which was at least 3 years ago, maybe 4, and really loved that, and it's a great Christmas read if you fancy a Christmas read. And I've been meaning to pick up more titles by her after that and just haven't, so I definitely will read more. I know that there is a series of Ripley books. I'm not sure if they're as good and as beloved as the first one, I don't know, so I may check those out, but I just want to really check out all the other standalones that she has, because I think that she's a gem, and it's great reading queer writing from that time. This one is much less queer than Carol is, but it still has that element to it, and I loved it. And I was talking to Lauren last night from Lauren in the Books, and she was saying that they're making a new TV show of this, because there is a movie from the 90s, isn't there, but they're making a new TV show of this with Andrew Scott, which I am really excited about. He plays the priest in Fleabag, and he's in His Dark Materials and lots of other stuff. I just think he's great. So thoroughly love that, thoroughly recommend. And now I've just started this, which is a proof copy I have, called Girl 11 by Amy Suiter Clarke, and this is set out like a podcast because it's about a true crime podcaster called Elle, who is investigating someone called the Countdown Killer, who has killed lots of women, and they're all 1 year less than the one before. So the first one was Beverly, who was 20, then Gillian, 19. So she's recording this podcast, so some of it is set out like a podcast transcript, and then some of it is just her life interacting with people. She has a best friend called Sasha, who has a daughter called Natalie, who is 10, and I'm imagining maybe that Natalie will come into the equation later on, because she is the right age to fit in with the Countdown Killer's pattern of murdering. So I've only just started this, only 20 pages in, but enjoying it so far, and I'll report back once I've read more. Hi, it is me from the beginning of the video, here to wrap up the end of this video. Back in London now, and did finish reading Girl 11 by Amy Suiter Clarke. And this I really enjoyed, because as I said when I started reading it, I was anticipating that the main character, Elle's best friend's daughter, Natalie, was going to get involved because she's, 10 years old. So I was like, well, is that a bit obvious? And if that happens, am I going to be annoyed? But I wasn't annoyed, because there were things that I did not see coming at all. And one of those was a really big thing. And I'm not sure if I should have noticed it, actually. I don't know, but I was thrilled to be thrilled and surprised. As I said, this book is split in lots of different formats. So we've got podcast transcripts, and then we also have Elle's everyday life. And I really like how this pays homage to sleuths and true crime podcasts, but is also critically looking at what coverage of true crime does. And if you sensationalize that, how does that encourage people? How does it perhaps create copycat killers? And whose responsibility is that? So I really liked all of those discussions in here. I enjoyed the crime itself, and we did learn more about the killer, which I don't always like, and I'm not really sure why I don't like that. But it's not in first person, which is why I think I was okay with it in here. I don't like giving the killer a voice. I feel like that feeds into what this book discusses about giving power to killers. Even though this is not, this is not true crime, but it is presenting itself as true crime. It's supposed to be as realistic as possible, and it is, of course, also talking about real life things that happen. So I feel like it's slightly different to other thrillers that I have read, and for that I appreciated it. I would definitely compare it to Kirsten Lepionka's books because she is a private investigator, and that's kind of what Elle is here. It's very good at what it sets out to do, and I have seen that Amy Suiter Clarke has a new book that's coming out in 2023, and the blurb is already out online, which just feels very forward thinking and great. An add-on that I also wanted to say is that when I was reviewing the Hasan Nekker book, I said it felt weird when it was talking about sexuality, because it felt like a straight person who didn't have very many gay friends writing about queerness in the 90s, but this book was published in 2017, and that kind of felt weird. But then I looked at the front, and actually this book was first published in 2006, but it was only translated into English in 2017. So I don't think that excuses the way it handles sexuality in the book, but it does make more sense in my head now that I have realised that. So I read 6 out of the 10 books that I took with me on holiday, which I think is pretty good going. Let me quickly show you the other 4 books, because obviously I haven't spoken about those at all, apart from throwing them around very quickly at the beginning. So I think the one I want to pick up next is The Second Woman by Louise May. This is translated from the French by Louise Rogers Lalaurie. This is about a woman who starts dating a man whose first wife went missing, and she is very intrigued by him. I think he's a very controlling person, and then the first wife comes back once they're together, and I think it's all tense and weird. So that sounds really exciting, and I think that one has also been optioned for a film. Sorry, the sun is doing ridiculous things today. Autumn is well and truly here. There are clouds, there's lots of rain, and it's just a bit all over the place. So the other one that I want to get to soon is called Blind Goddess by Anne Holt, which was a recommendation from one of you. This is translated from Norwegian by Tom Geddes, and this is about a lesbian detective, and she's solving crimes, and it's the first in a series, so would like to get to that. I don't always love cop-led crime thrillers, much prefer outside perspective, but always here for queer representation. So that's on the list. And speaking of queer representation, this is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt, and this is coming out on, I don't know the date, but it is October 2021, so it's coming out soon. It says, a brutal, unflinching, haunting house novel that takes readers from the well of the literary Gothic up through Brighton's queer scene and out into the heart of modern day trans experience in the UK. It's about a group of friends, and something happened in their past, and I think someone went missing in the middle of a forest, and then the main character is revisiting that forest in later life. Sounds great. And then this one is one I'm intrigued by. I'm hesitant about it because I picked it up because Emma over at Drinking by My Shelf had bought it and was very excited to read it, at which point I also bought it. Then I think it was her, I'm pretty sure it was her, she read it and hated it. So I didn't pick this one up as quickly as I thought I would because my excitement kind of dipped a bit. So this is The Aosawa Murders by Riku Onda, and it is translated from the Japanese by Alison Watts. It's set on an island where a whole family is murdered, and the only person who survives is their daughter, who I think is blind. Yes, she's blind. So I don't know how they handle disability in this book at all. But then we come into the present, and someone else is investigating it, and they open up the whole case again. I love murders on islands because then you have a limited number of suspects. But yeah, still nervous about this one. We'll read in due course. We'll tell you what I think of it. So did I find any favourites? Because that was kind of the point of this video, was kind of try and find any crime thriller favourites. And the answer actually is yes, because these two books I loved so much. So this is Mrs. March and this is The Talented Mr. Ripley. So I would urge you to pick up these books. And if you're someone who likes to read the book that films or TV shows are based on before you get to watching those things, then both of these have new adaptations being made soon. In this case, the first ever adaptation. So I don't know when they're coming out, but they are, you know, in progress. So if you want to do some book to screen reading, there you go. I mean, you should read them anyway, because I think that they are brilliant. Thank you for watching this vlog. I'm thinking that it's going to be quite a long vlog. I hope it was cozy. I hope you liked it. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, my new book is coming out next week, The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers. If you could pre-order it, I would love you forever. Thank you so much. I hope you're having a good start to the week. I'll speak to you later. Lots of love. Bye.